We're currently living in an era of technological wonderment where the latest smartphone is just around the corner and writing letters is a thing of the past. But ever so often, there's an archaeological discovery that paints a different picture of our ancestors, showing they weren't as technologically inept as we once thought. But what are these ancient devices and how much do we really know about them? For all this and more, stay tuned. Number 1. First up on our list is the Antikythera mechanism of Greece. It's a piece of ancient technology that still confuses scientists to this day and makes us wonder whether we truly are alone in this universe. You see, the device was found back in 1901 by a team of explorers who were searching around the small island of Antikythera, which is situated between the more popular islands of Kythera and Crete in the Greek Isles. By chance, the explorers decided to take a look at the coast of the island as well, which is where they stumbled upon a sunken wreckage. It's on this wreckage that these men and women found a number of artifacts, some of which dated back around 2,200 years. An incredible find, no doubt about it. But things really changed when they opened a preserved box to find the Antikythera device staring back at them. Although it looked like nothing more than a rock that had been covered in patches of mold, a quick wipe revealed cogs and gears that had once upon a time worked to great effect. But it wasn't until 70 years later that researchers actually discovered what the Antikythera mechanism was. Believe it or not, but the most prominent idea is that the device was a part of an ancient analog computer, so much more complicated in its design than anything else that was around at that time. And what was it used for? Well, according to scholars, the whole point of the device was likely to calculate the motions of the heavens. Number 2, and then we have the Baghdad battery, which absolutely blew explorers' minds. You see, according to our history books, the first battery in the world was invented by an Italian physicist by the name of Alessandro Volta back in the 1790s. But as you'll come to realize, our history books can paint a different picture to what actually happened before there were cameras and adequate notes about happenings on Earth. Something that Khujut Rabu, a German archaeologist, would know a lot about with his discovery of the Baghdad battery in 1983. According to reports, this device consisted of a clay jar which looks somewhat ordinary in the setting in which it was found, but it's when he looked inside the pot that he found something peculiar, a copper cylinder set next to an iron rod, and when researchers finally got their hands on the battery, they knew precisely what it was. All a user would have to do was pour a weak acid such as vinegar or grape juice into the clay jar, and the device would go on to generate around 1 volt of electricity, something that would have seemed out of this world when it was used about 2,000 years ago. But what would such an ancient civilization need electricity for? Well, as it turns out, researchers still have absolutely no idea. The Baghdad battery could have been used to electroplate items or as a heavenly item in religious ceremonies. But since the device was stolen in 2003, we won't know any more for quite some time. 3. Oh, and did you know that the ancient Greeks made automated doors? A ridiculous idea, right? It must be considering how the history books place the invention of automated doors at around 1931, with their appearance marking the fact that humanity had finally reached what was referred to then as the modern age. But as it turns out, this was nothing new to the world, with the first real set of automatic doors dating all the way back to 1 AD. But how was this possible without the use of free-flowing electricity? Quite simple, actually. You see, the ancient Greeks found that if they lit a fire, they could generate an extraordinary amount of heat and energy. The increase in heat then led to an atmospheric buildup in brass vessels, which would then pump water into holding containers that would essentially act as weights. In other words, this was a rudimentary hydraulic system, and once the containers had been adequately filled with water, they would pull the doors open. As you can imagine, these doors weren't exactly popular back in the day. It was far easier to open them with your hands than to wait for the process to open them for you. In fact, the time frame of the process was hours long, and once it got started, it was extremely difficult to stop. In other words, automatic doors such as these probably open just once a day. That being said, still shows some serious ingenuity at a time here technology was not thought to be present. Number 4, next we have Hu Feng Didong Yi, which the ancient Chinese used to great effect. If there's one thing our ancestors battled with, it was the understanding of the natural world. More often than not, disasters were understood as the effect effects of angry gods, and as a result, they would try their hardest to prevent these disasters by praying to the heavens. The ancient Chinese were, however, less inclined to place their safety in the hands of some deity, though, and ended up inventing the Hangfu Didongyi device so that they could always know when an earthquake was on the way. The early seismoscope is the first earthquake detection device ever recorded in the history of the Earth, and dates back more than 2,000 years ago. The inventor of the device, known only as Zhang Heng, was later dubbed the Leonardo da Vinci of China, which makes sense considering how the piece of ancient technology was able to detect earthquakes that were taking place hundreds of kilometers away. How did it work though? Well, the device consisted of a jar shaped like a dragon's head in true Chinese fashion. Within this jar was 8 tubed projections with 8 corresponding toads at its base. Each of these toads represented a direction in which a detected seismic wave was traveling. Essentially, a small ball would be dropped by the device into one of the toads, showing the direction of an earthquake and allowing ancient cities to evacuate in time to save lives. A rather impressive invention if we do say so ourselves. Number 5, and then we have the armored car of Leonardo himself. For those of you who don't know, Leonardo da Vinci was one of the most brilliant inventors of his time. What was most surprising about this Italian Renaissance man is that his ideas were so complex and beyond what was possible back in the 1400s that he designed a couple of inventions that could never be built because of limitations of his era. A great example of this is his armored car idea, the blueprints of which display a movable vehicle shaped in the form of a rounded hat. This vehicle would then be decorated in cannons and be able to move in every direction possible. There were also small eye holes in each direction, but for the most part, the armored car was covered in what appeared to be sheet metal, allowing for the deflection of small bullets. Suffice to say, this little idea gave rise to incredible machines of war like the tank, which, unlike Da Vinci's invention, were made to run on tracks rather than manually operated wheels. Funny enough, the Renaissance man didn't stop there though. This armored car of his might be one of his most famous inventions, but he also designed a working parachute and diving suit before anyone had even thought of exploring the sky or depths of the ocean. The man even came up with the first rudimentary blueprint of a machine gun before the idea of automatic fire was ever used in military talks. He truly was a genius. Number 6, last but not least, we have to give props to the aeolipile. Although you may not have heard of this ancient device up until now, it could have actually changed the world for the better if it had gained steam like its inventor hoped it would. Created in the 1st century AD, the aeolipile was actually the first steam turbine ever created and was invented solely by a mathematician and engineer by the name of Heron of Alexandria. The device consisted of a hollow sphere that was mounted in such a way that it could turn a pair of hollow tubes that were connected to a cauldron. When steam crept up the tubes and into the sphere, the device rotated at high speeds, which would have allowed for the generation of electricity. Unfortunately for Heron, though, the device was never taken any further than its rudimentary design. The aeolipile was actually used to entertain royalty as a novelty device in the end, with Heron now knowing just how close he was to bringing on the age of machinery. And there you have it, the 6 ancient technologies that were way too advanced for their eras. Which is your favorite device though, and did we miss out on any others? Be sure to let us know in the comments section down below.